Today we'll be taking a look at one of the heroes of the Carcharadons chapter, Tyberos the Red Wake. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Today we'll be taking a look at a really strong Forge World melee character, who is arguably one of the strongest close combat buffing units in the whole game. This guy is Tyberos the Red Wake of the Carcharadons chapter, also known as the Space Sharks. In 8th edition, these fancy Forge World chapters can decide who they're going to be a successor chapter of, as it wasn't ever really confirmed in the background. This means that the Space Sharks actually have a massive ton of options when it comes to competitive 40k, making this guy an incredibly interesting choice. In this video, we'll be taking a look at his datasheet, any obvious synergies or combos we can use for him, and how I would personally run him on the tabletop. Now in the background, the Carcharadons, which I think I've been saying wrong up to now, are a loyalist Space Marine chapter of uncertain genetic heritage. They're famed for showing up unannounced at the scene of battle, and silently and ruthlessly going in for the kill, very much living up to their shark heraldry. They're a fleet-based chapter that were banished in the past for unknown reasons to roam the galaxy, and they are sustained only by taking a tithe. Their chapter master is Tyberos, possibly one of the last people you want to meet in close combat in the world of 40k, as his signature war gear both encompasses chain fists and lightning claws in the same pieces of war gear. He first showed up in the Badab War, at the spearhead of an assault force of lightning claw armed Terminators, savagely attacking the Renegades. So a very cool model indeed. Let's see what his datasheet has to offer us. So Tyberos is an HQ choice for the Carcharadons. He's a Terminator chapter master, and he currently costs 150 points to field him in your army. He's got a decently impressive stat line, movement of 5, weapon skill 2 up, ballistic skill 3 up, though he doesn't have any ranged weapons, strength 4, toughness 4, 6 wounds, 5 attacks, leadership 9 and a 2 up save, and of course a 4 up invul save as he is a chapter master. He's armed only with Hunger and Slake, the Chain Fist and Lightning Claw portions of his melee weapons respectively. Hunger is the Chain Fist profile, it's strength times 2, AP minus 4, but it's flat damage 3, so very impressive indeed. Like regular Chain Fists, you subtract 1 from the hit roll when you're making an attack with the weapon. He will be re-rolling 1s because of his chapter master aura, but I'm afraid that aura does have the old wording, so the re-rolls happen before modifiers, so at present he can't re-roll 2s. Slake is the Lightning Claw profile. This is strength user, though this will be strength 5 due to his aura, which we'll talk about in a second, AP minus 3 and damage 2, and he can re-roll failed wound rolls for this weapon. He has the Savagery Beyond Reason special rule, which means that all friendly Carcharadons within 6 inches of Tyberos the Red Wake have +1 strength, and this will of course affect himself as well. This maths out that he's going to be more effective at killing any infantry that are 2 wounds and toughness 4 or less, with Slake, the Lightning Claws, and better at most anything tougher with Hunger, the Chain Fist profile. Though both are absolutely fearsome weapons and will do solid damage to any target. So those 2 aura abilities combine to be an incredibly powerful buffing character. The reroll failed hit rolls chapter master profile is great. It's a shame it isn't the full reroll hit profile ones from the new Space Marine Codex wording, but it's still certainly very solid, and the fact that he combines this with giving you +1 strength as well means that a standard squad of Space Marines just goes absolutely through the roof in terms of damage output in melee when they're stood next to him. The +1 strength aura will be more powerful depending on the unit it's buffing and the toughness of the target. Typically going from strength 4 that most Space Marines have to strength 5 is a big jump, as you wound toughness 4, toughness 5 and toughness 8 targets better. Similarly, if your Marines are either strength 7 or strength 8, say they're bearing Power Fist or Thunderhammers, then going from strength 8 to strength 9 is also quite a big deal, as you wound toughness 8 targets on a 3 rather than a 4. So if you do have an efficient melee unit that's either strength 4 or strength 8, then this guy is an amazing choice, though to be honest he'll do pretty well in most situations. Aside from this, he has the standard special rules. He's been FAQ'd to have Shock Assault, meaning he'll typically have 6 attacks on the charge, and if and when you get him into the Assault Doctrine, he'll also be having an extra -1 AP on those weapons, although the AP is already quite good. As a Terminator, he can be set up in Teleport Strike and deploy from reserves, perhaps to come in to buff other deep striking elements that are hoping to get into melee. At 150 points for all this, it's quite decent. Not having to pay the command points for the Chapter Master rule is certainly a positive. and he has an incredibly decent fighty profile on top of that, with a damage output stronger than your standard Smash Captains, due to being AP -4, and having 5 attacks at base, and he's also incredibly tough with that Terminator armor and 6 wounds. His main issue is his mobility, so in my mind you're generally going to want to deep strike him. But let's take a look at what obvious buffs and synergies that we can use for him on the tabletop. So because of the way that the Carcharadons work, you can declare them to be a successor of whichever Space Marine chapter you want. I believe it would be one of the ones from the core Space Marines Codex, not something like Blood Angels and Space Wolves, although if I'm wrong please correct me down below in the comments. This means that we have a ridiculous amount of stratagem, special rules and options that we could use with Tyberos, and we could even give him whatever Warlord trait we wanted from any of the successor chapters, as of course he doesn't have a fixed Warlord trait. If we are actually using the successor chapter rules, then Strong's picks for me would be the Hungry for Battle trait, which will give him +1 to his charge rolls, Master Artisans, which will be particularly useful for Hunger's Chain Fist attacks, as the wording of Master Artisans will mean that you get to reroll 1/2 to hit per turn, and then 1 wound roll per turn, so he will be absolutely phenomenal in terms of damage output against heavy targets. Whirlwind of Rage is another solid option to get him some extra hits on 6s. There are a number of options for which one to choose, for which main chapter to be your parent chapter, and admittedly you might want to be picking this based on the rest of your army as well, not just this guy. But naturally he will do very well with things like White Scars, who have some great options for charging fighty characters, not least of all their Combat Doctrine, which will give him +1 damage on the turn that he charges, but also things like their Stratagem for a 3d6 and pick the 2 highest charge, and certain Warlord traits like Chigorian Storm, which will give him +d3 attacks on the charge. Raven Guard could also be another good option. You could teleport him in to support some of their deep striking close combat elements, such as the dreaded Assault Centurions. They wouldn't get the best use out of his +1 strength, but full rerolls in close combat and shooting with those Hurricane Bolters would be an incredibly powerful benefit. Iron Hands could make him more survivable with the 6-up Feel No Pain. Salamanders could get him those very nice rerolls, plus they have some incredibly strong Warlord traits, such as giving him +2 toughness to be an absolute tank, or +2 strength. You could potentially have those Lightning Claws go to strength 7 if you wanted. Plus their stratagem for +1 to wound certainly wouldn't go amiss. You could have this guy wounding knights on 2s. In terms of book Warlord traits, the Imperium Sword is probably the most obvious go-to. +1 attack and +1 strength on the charge never really goes amiss too much, though with the profile of his weapons he wouldn't really care too much about the +1 strength, as he already does that himself. Iron Resolve could give him a little bit extra durability with a Feel No Pain type save, and Champion of Humanity could make him better against characters. This guy obviously has a ton of synergy with a bunch of units, including other characters. In particular, things in the Space Marine Codex I think he'd be good with are things like Terminators that can use both his reroll in shooting and in melee, same with those deep striking Assault Centurions in Raven Guard or White Scars, maybe a tooled up unit of Vanguard veterans. Having a squad of these guys with potential strength 5 Lightning Claws and power weapons could be fun, or strength 10 power fists of course, and of course he can also help out other characters as well, particularly things like other Smash Captains. He can get buffs from characters too. Reroll 1s to wounds from lieutenants would never go amiss. He could potentially be healed by apothecaries, and he could benefit from chaplain litanies, particularly if he deep struck into the litany of +2 to charge from a chaplain. That could get him into combat a lot more reliably. In terms of stratagems, as a fighty Space Marine character, he has decent options. We'll not go into the ones from the specific supplement codexes because that would take far too long, but from the main rulebook, either fighting when he dies or fighting again in the fight phase for 3 command points could both be really efficient choices on him. They're generally pretty efficient on the standard Smash Captains, and this guy frankly hits harder than Smash Captains most of the time. I believe that he could access Fury of the First, as he is an Adeptus Astartes Terminator unit. If you wanted Hunger the Chain Fist to hit on 2s in close combat, that would be the equivalent of a 25% damage increase for 1 command point, potentially useful. And finally, Transhuman Physiology for 2 command points could have a decent niche on this guy, because frankly you're probably going to need to use anti-tank weapons to shift him efficiently. So he might well be being wounded on 2s, and if you can make that to be wounded on 4s, he's going to survive a lot better. Finally, he could also make good use of the psychic power Might of Heroes, because +1 toughness, attacks and strength is not a bad thing to have. So how would I use this guy on the field of battle then? I think there are two main ways that you could use him. The first is to buff your melee units with that +1 strength aura, or he could be used just to buff your gun line and provide an absolutely enormous melee threat that could really punish the enemy army for trying to move up and assault your gun line. You could potentially even switch this up game on game, depending on where you think he's going to be most useful. With that fairly slow movement speed, he's going to take a while to get into close combat, so unless you just want to support a lot of an advancing gun line bullying the midfield and making sure that your opponent stays well away from you unless they want to be hungered and slaked to death, then they'll have to stay well away from him. Bear in mind that as he has no ranged weapons, if he isn't expecting to be charging in the ensuing fight phase, there's nothing to stop him advancing each turn, so he could be quite fast on any turn that he isn't wanting to make a charge. I would typically probably make use of his teleport strike rule if you are wanting to support assault units, however, dropping him down alongside a big squad of Terminators or something, and then using any tricks that you have access to make the charge as easy as possible. I think that his melee profile is strong enough that you could just use him as a lone deep strike threat if you really wanted to. If you're doing this, then I'd drop him down out of line of sight if possible, or ideally in cover to reduce overwatch as much as possible. Aim to get a charge on a heavy hitting enemy unit, and strongly consider any other stratagems that you have to boost damage output, particularly fighting twice. If you have the option, obviously it's best to end the combat in cover, out of line of sight, or tying up another enemy unit if you have the option to, and don't forget to use his pile in and consolidate moves to their maximal effects to achieve this. Overall, I think he's now really quite a solid pick for his points. He is expensive compared with a fair few other Space Marine characters, but he does hit harder than a Smash Captain, provide full Chapter Master rerolls while also being pretty durable as well, and that +1 strength aura is just icing on the cake. This guy certainly makes a compelling argument to play your army as Carcharadons, and for most Space Marine armies, provided they are not using any special characters, then running your chapter as Carcharadons doesn't really restrict you all that much. So thanks for listening to another Auspex Tactics video. It's been fun to cover another interesting Forge World character. As always, please let me know if I've misunderstood any rules, as Forge World is just a little bit of an extra added difficulty compared with the standard Games Workshop Codex stuff. If you've thought of any particular cool combos with this guy, again let me know. And feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more videos like this. I also have a Patreon page, any support would be helpful, and a big thank you to my current Patreons. This channel wouldn't be where it is now without you guys. Thanks very much for listening. I'll hope to see you guys in the next video.